If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn it to Romans, the 3rd chapter. This is where we will spend our time today. The book of the Revelation contains a text in chapter 3 that says this: I counsel you to buy from me gold refined with fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so that you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so that you can see. Just as in 3 weeks ago, the emperor needs some new clothes. Some of us need our eyes opened. Let's take a look at this text. I'll begin reading in verse 19. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, that all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. But now the righteousness of God apart from the law is being revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ to all and on all who believe. For there is no difference. All have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Jesus Christ, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance, his patience, God has passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the time, presently, his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Where then is boasting? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? No, but by the law of faith. Therefore we conclude that anyone is justified by faith apart from the deeds of the law. Or is he the God of the Jews only? Is he not also the God of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Since there is one God who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised by faith, do we then make void the law through faith? Certainly not. On the contrary, we establish it. Paul is making a blanket statement to everyone here, all of humanity, both Jew and Gentile alike. And the statement is this, if you want to put it in colloquial terms: no one will make the grade no matter how good they are in this life. There's only one person who's made the grade on merit, biblically speaking, and that's Jesus himself. We are all helpless to meet the standard. And there's only one. That standard is perfection. Jesus was clear in Matthew chapter 5. He says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now you can translate that word perfect in the sense that we understand the virtue of perfection, or you can translate it also complete, but the outcome is the same. A person who is complete would be therefore perfect. And even with this advantage of revelation that we have in the law and in the gospel, we've got work to do. Well, what is that work? What do we do to do the works of God here on earth? Jesus was very clear. John chapter 6, believe in him whom God has sent. Well, beyond that work, there is nothing that you and I can do that contributes to our salvation before God. Nothing. There is a confusion today, both in believing and in secular circles, regarding this particular understanding before God. The confusion is this: the law is still here, it still holds sway, but obeying it won't get us where we need to be. It hasn't gone away. Jesus said that none of it would pass. Now, what does that mean? You have to unpack that just a little bit. Does it mean all 613 precepts of the civil, ceremonial, and moral law? No, it does not. But it means that only in Jesus is that law fulfilled and kept, not kept and fulfilled in any of us. So Jesus was right when he said, don't think I came to abolish the law and the prophets, Matthew chapter 5. C.S. Lewis has a comment here that I find very helpful. I want to read it to you if I could. I don't generally like to read things in a sermon, but I will today because this is important and it makes this understandable. Niceness, Lewis says. Wholesome, integrated personality. Niceness is an excellent thing. Making people nice is not at all the same thing as saving their souls. A world of nice people turned away from God, content in their niceness, looking no further, they would be just as desperately in need of salvation as a miserable world and they might be more difficult to save. Redemption will improve people, but improvement will not redeem people. God came to turn us not into improved people, but into a new kind of person. Not like teaching a horse to jump better, but by turning a horse into a winged creature. I think this captures what Paul is getting at here. He's talking to us about the knowledge of the law, and that the knowledge of the law brings in the knowledge of sin. And with that knowledge of sin, we have the full recognition that none of us can live in a way such that we can make it before God. Not all had, Paul makes that clear as well, not all have the written law at Paul's time of history. Not everybody knows of the moral law, the one that still stands to this day for all people. And he says the Gentiles do the work of the law with no law. How is that? Well, every human being, if we understand us to be made in God's image, has sentience. Within that sentience is the sense of self-reflectance. Within that sense of self-reflectance is what we call the conscience. Now, the only thing that is necessary for us to say that we have sinned is to defy our own conscience. Who in this world would ever say that they never defied their own conscience? That they never did something or thought something that they thought morally questionable? If anybody would say that, I would say they're deficient in some way. They're deluded in some way. There is no way there is a human being on the earth today who has never defied their own conscience. Well, there's a deep truth there that points to something in the creation itself. Regardless of the mechanics of creation, I don't really care about that. But if we are made in God's image, humanity has the capacity to know the moral law via the conscience, even though there is none written. This is why Paul says the Gentiles are a law unto themselves. They obey the law without having the law. Now, it is this moral law of conscience, you see, that condemns all of humanity. And that's a hard pill for some people to swallow. They just cannot swallow the idea that we are completely lost and that we are all in defiance of our own conscience in some way. We are born with the propensity to defy our own conscience. All that's required, according to Paul, is one defiance of our conscience. That in itself proves that there is a law written within us. It points universally to the universal knowledge of morality within the human being. And you know, when you think about it, if you look around the world, C.S. Lewis did this in his writings, made a comparison of all of the moral statements from cultures all over the world and throughout history. They are very, very similar. Very similar. People like things like courage. They don't like things like cowardice. People like things like truthfulness. They don't like things like lying. But the real law is so complex and so comprehensive, who can keep it? Well, the reality is that none could keep it after the fall. There are some people who actually believe, and it's remarkable to me, that they see the fall as a fall that goes up, that humanity fell up. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes this, that we fell up. But is this really so? And Paul kind of alludes to this here. It's not so at all. The knowledge we gained regarding that which was not available to us, it was forbidden. We did gain knowledge. We gained a knowledge of good and evil that we would not have had otherwise. But it was a knowledge that perhaps God would have given later, but that we weren't ready for. It was merely there to give us that instance of real choice with real consequences, such that we could live in a world where choice is real. And so when we chose, we didn't fall up. We fell down for sure. We lost something incredible. We'll never really know what that lost thing was until we stand before Him. But we all have this sense of the legal need somehow to be set free from this taint of the moral and the taint of the fact that we've defied our own conscience. Yet we don't all see it for what it is. Paul uses a metaphor from the courtroom to demonstrate what God has done. He uses the word justification. What does that mean? Well, it's an acquittal. It's not that we're no longer sinners. It's just that God reckons us to be no longer sinners. It's that the blood of Jesus buys back for us that sense of righteousness that we had lost in the garden and that we lose every time we defy our own conscience. This treating the sinner as righteous is a shock to the Jewish mind, although for the Gentile mind it was just a blessing. That's why the Gentiles flocked to the message of the gospel. See, the Jew had in mind the mercy seat, where you had the cherubim on the cover of the ark, on each side, one on each side, and within the ark was the law, and the sprinkling 7 times of the blood of the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement sacrifice, was to signify the mending of our separation from God via the breaking of the law. In that way, we could be made justified before God by means of Jesus' sacrifice. Was a very difficult thing for the Jewish mind. But when you think about it, the picture is precisely what Paul, the Pharisee and the rabbi, is painting for us and for them. It's the same picture. God maintains his righteousness in wrath, which was poured out on Jesus. But he maintains his forgiveness and the redemption and the justification of humanity by the way he sees us because of the price that was paid. Humans aren't insignificant in this universe. I know the universe is very vast. Some people like to point to the fact that the earth is an insignificant speck of dust in a vast, indifferent universe. Its vastness says nothing about the importance of humanity before God. That there might be other worlds that God is concerned about, that could well be, but that changes nothing for this one. Nothing at all. God maintains his righteousness in wrath. Does that make sense to everybody? He allows the wrath to be poured out upon Jesus. So the sin is punished. Justice is served. And we become justified before him by acceptance of that payment for the sins that we have committed. We are guilty. God doesn't dismiss that at all. This is why reconciliation is such an important component of this. But he punishes Jesus in our place. God is holy. He cannot abide sin. His eyes are too pure to look upon sin, he says through Habakkuk. But he can choose to satisfy its penalty if he wants to. Doesn't do away with it. He doesn't ignore it. He doesn't simply just blanketedly forgive. He makes a way wherein that forgiveness can come through reconciliation. Somebody's got to pay the price in this cosmic justice. The whole of the Jewish system pointed to it very clearly. Very clearly. That's why all the sacrifices, that's why all the oblations, that's why all of the ceremonial work was done in the temple, why the temple life was so important. The deep weight of history from Judaism is so evident in what Paul is trying to get across to us here. Like a heartbroken child, we can come to God and be set free, completely free from what we have been and done. Isn't that something about children that you notice? When a child does something wrong and they're caught in it, there is a sense of remorse so deep, childish but deep, in which their desire is to see themselves set right once again before their parents. They want to have that restoration of relationship with the parent that says, you're okay in my sight. They want that so desperately. You see that in little children. I remember it, feeling it as a child. Don't you? Well, God is giving us the same opportunity. He's saying, look, I have made a way that you can be made right before me. If you will accept the payment that Jesus made, that I made through Jesus for your sins, then you could be made righteous before me. We believe what Jesus did for us was sufficient. We rest on our full weight upon that payment for sin, and we come to God to ask for the forgiveness that is provided. There's only one requirement, and that's the broken and contrite heart that no longer holds on to our own rightness, but we declare ourselves wrong and recognize it. As Paul says, where is the bragging? All are wrong before God. We confirm the law in that because we love God and more, He loves us. And that we now want to break the law no more because we don't want to break God, our Father's heart. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to stay here and pray with me, speak with me, I'll stay as long as it